Survival horror gaming has had its hooks in me for as long as I can remember. The original Resident Evil trilogy is not only responsible for my love of video games, but for my love of horror in general. And I love talking about survival horror games on this channel, especially the new ones, but man did I feel like a phony when I realized that there was a new survival horror game heavily inspired by the old school games that I love that I completely missed, that I had no idea existed, called Crow Country. But anyway, today was the day that I decided to right that wrong. And I just got done playing it and I have a lot of thoughts that I want to share with you guys. So I'm going to jump into the review. I'm going to show you some raw gameplay, but before I do that, consider subscribing. I talk about video games all the time on this page. Day one reviews, other video game discussions as well. And horror gaming always gets special treatment here, but I also talk about and review movies and TV shows. But anyway, let's talk about Crow Country. So first things first, I want to make it clear that this video is going to contain zero spoilers. I am going to talk about the story, but I'm not going to talk about any specific details of that story, and all of the gameplay footage that you're seeing is from the first third of the game. So what exactly is Crow Country? It's a survival horror game, but unlike most modern survival horror games that seem to go down only one of two routes, those being number one, take a lot of inspiration from the Resident Evil remakes, or number two, take a lot of inspiration from the Outlast games. Instead of doing either of those two things, it goes all the way back to the late 1990s, to the era that many still consider to be the golden age of survival horror gaming, and it draws all of its inspiration from there. Playing Crow Country is like getting into a time machine, turning the dial to 1999, and being able to play through the original Resident Evil trilogy again for the very first time. And I know, there's been a lot of throwback survival horror games that have come out in recent years. Games designed specifically to tap into our collective zombie and Pyramid Head fueled nostalgia. One of those games that comes to mind is Tormented Souls, a game that I really like and I find to be wickedly underappreciated and overlooked. But to me, and this is subjective, that game never truly felt like it took me back in time. It felt like I was playing exactly what I was playing, which was a modern game made to feel old. But that's absolutely not the case with Crow Country. I genuinely believe that if you found a relatively gullible individual and you sat them in front of a TV and you said something along the lines of, "Hey Timmy, check out this game called Crow Country. It was made in 1997, but it was never released. But lucky for you, Timmy, a copy just leaked into the wild. Here, try it." There's a strong likelihood that they would actually believe you, because Crow Country does so much to mimic survival horror games of that era that I myself had a hard time believing it's not some long lost, mysterious relic of a bygone time. As you can see, the general gameplay is clearly similar to survival horror games of the 90s. It hits that vibe perfectly, no doubt, but it doesn't just stop there, which is where a lot of other modern made-to-feel old games end in its similarities. But the sound design is straight out of the 90s as well. The sound effects when you open menus and change pages, the ambient noise as you explore, the subtly spooky yet simultaneously sweet soundtrack. But the best part is that it all sounds like it was recorded in the 90s as well. Nothing you hear is gonna sound clean. Nothing you hear sounds overly crisp or polished, which I guess you could interpret that as me saying everything sounds kind of compressed and old and kind of tinny and lo-fi, but come on. Old school survival horror fans, you know how much that adds to the vibe, to the tension, to a survival horror game's cozy charm. And obviously the graphics too. As you can see, the graphics are designed to feel like they were made on a big fat off-white computer surrounded by Surge soda cans during the Clinton administration. But I guess that's just my long-winded way of saying that Crow Country did for me the goal of what most works of art strive to achieve, and that's that it transported me. It brought me to a time that's long since passed, and it did a damn good job at it too. But anyway, let's talk more about the specifics of Crow Country. What's the story like? Again, I'm not going to get into any spoilers here because I do think this game actually has a quite interesting and surprisingly memorable story that I want you to discover for yourself. And some of the most memorable moments of this game, for me, was seeing how the story unfolded. But you play as a girl named Mara, who's a special agent, and she shows up at an abandoned family fun park called Crow Country, and her goal is to find the owner of the park. But when the game starts, you're not quite sure why you're looking for the owner, or what your connection is, or why the park has been abandoned. And as you're conducting your investigation, you quickly find out that there is a large handful of weird, creature-like monsters wandering about, and you also run into some interesting side characters as well, all with their own motives, goals, and distinct personalities. And speaking of personality, our main character, and pretty much all supporting characters, have a lot more of it than I was expecting. There's no voice acting in this game. It's all just written dialogue, which usually annoys me in most games, if I'm being honest, but I found that it works really, really well here, because the writing and the dialogue is so quick and to the point, but with no compromise of character building or noticeable personality traits. Mara especially is such a fun and likable character. Her dialogue is often quick-witted and funny, or at other times self-deprecating or even fourth wall breaking. It was just so fun to see, and this game already would have been great based on the gameplay alone, but the fact that the story not only remained interesting, but engaging the whole way through, and the characters were also shockingly likable and memorable, it was just the icing on this thick-ass cake. Now I want to get into more detail about the gameplay, and not to sound like a broken record, or to say that the only thing this game has going for it is that it's clearly inspired by horror games of the 90s, but it's not just this game's presentation. Its gameplay also feels like you're playing a game ripped out of 1998. More specifically though, the way this game handles its level design and its puzzles and its exploration, it's most similar to the original Resident Evil trilogy, and I absolutely love that. So when you enter the park for the first time, most doors will be locked, but they won't just be locked. They'll be locked and they'll require a specific key to open them. Some might need a bronze key, or a silver key, or maybe even a crank handle, but eventually you'll find a door that is unlocked, and that might lead to another unlocked door, which might lead you to a brand new part of the park that you didn't know existed beforehand. You'll find small puzzles that you'll be able to quickly do, and that'll help you progress, but you'll also find larger, more thought out puzzles that you'll need to return to later, once you find one or two more missing pieces. Then, like most survival horror games like this, there'll come a point where you'll think you're backed into a wall. You'll look at the map, and you'll see that you've already explored everywhere you can, and all other doors are locked, and you don't have any other keys, and you'll think to yourself, damn, what do I do now? You'll consider looking up a walkthrough maybe, or maybe you'll check out a couple YouTube videos to see if you missed something. Then, like a light in the darkness, you'll notice one small thing that you may have missed, and that'll lead you to the discovery of a brand new key, which in turn grants you access to areas that you've never been to before, that have been blocked off for you, and your adventure continues until that process repeats itself. And in all honesty, this old school survival horror exploration and the way it progresses is arguably my favorite way that it's done in video games ever, period. But the combat is also great in this game, or should I say, it's great in the context of a game like this. If you're a fan of these sorts of games, you'll know what to expect. It's tank controls, which I don't mind at all. I'm actually a fan of tank controls in games like this, but Crow Country does a few things to innovate on the tank control formula to make it feel fresh, but also to make it feel a little more inviting and possibly a little more easy for the potentially new players. The first thing that it does differently is that you're able to fine-tune your aiming so you can pull off more specifically placed shots with your weapons. In the original Resident Evil games, you essentially only had 3 options of where you aimed your gun, either in the middle, up high, or down low, but in Crow Country you can use your analog stick to choose the exact spot where you want to aim and shoot, which comes in handy not only because headshots obviously do more damage, but because for some reason there's explosive barrels lying around everywhere, and also just glass barrels and jars and other things you can shoot in hopes that they contain loot. And there's also a laser pointer on your gun that makes aiming even more fine-tuned. And since Resident Evil 4 is one of my favorite games of all time, of course I'm a fan of the laser pointer. If a game has a laser pointer in it, it already gets a couple bonus points for me. Another thing that this game does that's different than most other tank control based survival horror games is that you can use the analog stick to move the camera and see 360 degrees around your character, which I thought was really cool. Again, in most survival horror games like this, it's fixed camera angles. You can only see what they want you to see. And don't get me wrong, I love that. I wouldn't change that in the original Resident Evil games or anything like that. I think it adds to the tension and to the horror. Being able to hear a monster but not see it is just freaky as hell. But I do think it's a cool, refreshing change of pace with this game, that it lets you take more control of what you see. But do I have any negative thoughts about this game? Honestly, not a lot, and the ones that I do have are very minor. The first being that I think this game on its normal difficulty is a little too easy. You always get a little too much ammo. Enemies die, I think, a little too easily, and you always get too much health, I believe. But of course you can always play it on harder difficulty level. And then I guess my other critique would be that this game is on the shorter side. You can beat it in around 5 to 6 hours, but to be fair, old school survival horror games weren't that long themselves. The original Resident Evil trilogy, all of them can be beaten in under 10 hours, and this game is only $20. If you're not already a fan of old school survival horror games, I think Crow Country is fresh enough and new player friendly enough that this might be the game to convert you if other old survival horror games have not done that already. But anyway, that's my thoughts on Crow Country after playing it. Have you played it yet? If you have, let me know what you've thought about it in the comments. If you haven't played it, let me know, are you gonna check it out? And if you're not gonna check it out and you're gonna ignore it completely, let me know why, because I'm curious. Once again, consider subscribing if you haven't already, and thank you for watching, especially if you watched this far.